guys, what is up? Public here, back with another video, and today we're kind of doing a bit of an update, a little later than I wanted to, but we're going to talk about everything with Shadow Priest in the Midnight Beta. Now that the beta is actually launched, we're going to do kind of a refresh of how Shadow is currently looking, what are all the changes. So this will be kind of your summary video, and I'll sprinkle in a little bit of feedback and just kind of tease a little bit of that I've already posted a lot of that on the forums, which you can find links to in the description. But we're going to go over all the changes right now for Shadow Priest coming from the War Within into Midnight in beta. Let's dive in. Alright, so we have quite a lot of changes. I will say a lot of this is not fully done yet, so take that with a grain of salt. And I'm going to cover this first because it is just something to be aware of. We are still missing 3 talents in our Spec Tree, okay? We did have a few of these talents data mined as being added, but they never actually got put into our talent tree. So we don't know if that means that they're still working on them or whatever else that means. But nonetheless, we know that we're still going to get some changes in the future, whether that's actually adding those talents into the game or whatnot. So just in case you weren't sure, that is still the case on beta. We have 3 talents in our Spec Tree that are not added, but everything else has been added in terms of our class tree. Everything's in there. Void Weaver Archon, hero talents are in there. Not to say that those things might not get changed, but we know at least we do have 3 talents that need to be added, okay? All right, so let's dive in. Let's scroll past my old video. All right, so we did get baseline spell changes going into this expansion. So if you didn't already see, Silence, Dispersion, and Vampiric Embrace are now all baseline as a Shadow Priest. So you just get these for free. They're no longer talents that we have to take. You just get them. So you can see here in our talent tree, right, like the top of the tree is very, very different. Now they've made those spells baseline. Okay, now we'll cover the class tree first. I'll try to do more highlights here as much as I can because there's a lot of changes here. A lot of nodes have changed positions. It's pretty much a rework of our class tree, which makes sense. It hasn't really been touched since it was originally added in Dragonflight very much. So Mind Blast is now in the class tree, and Shadow or Death is no longer guaranteed by default. Big change. Shadow Fiend was also moved from the class tree to the Spec Tree for us. And then Psychic Scream, Desperate Prayer, and Fade are now all in the class tree. These were baseline before. So they've kind of adjusted what we get for free here. Generally speaking, for us, we're still going to be able to get everything we want and more, to be honest with you. And they've really kind of designed the class tree around the big important talents that we were always taking, which is mainly around Fade for us. So you go from, Fade, reduce the cooldown of Fade. They made this Translucent Image our capstone, which reduces the damage we take, which was by far one of the best nodes in the tree, so this makes sense. They also put Phantasm down here, again, kind of collecting all the Fade talents. They also added a new one, which is really fun, called Spectral Illusion, which creates, this is actually used to be like a Torghast power. It's actually really nice for like open world leveling and that kind of stuff, because it like taunts mobs for that duration. It's very nice. They also sprinkled in quite a lot of like random damage increase nodes that are just 1000% passive. Nothing we interact with. So here's like 3% intellect, Shadow Word Pain damage, Mind Flay damage. So I'm not a big fan of these, but they are sprinkled throughout the tree, which is kind of dictating where we path. But again, like I said, especially with the new talents you get from leveling from 80 to 90, we're easily getting everything we want and more. Desperate Prayer is also in here. So, from a class tree perspective, like I said, they've reworked this quite significantly, but we're still getting all the big stuff that we care about. Let's see, make sure I covered everything. They did remove quite a lot of stuff. Looks like I have a bit of a typo there. So a lot of old talents are gone. Divine Star is gone. Halo is gone. They did move Halo into Archon talent tree only, but that did get removed. Like I said, Shadow Fiend got moved. Throes of Pain got removed. A lot of stuff got culled out. Death and Madness is the other one to talk about. Kind of sad with this guy. This is now moved into the Spec Tree as a choice node with Death Speaker. Like I said, lots of new talents. Most of these are just, simple increases to like spells and small stuff like that to get the Spectral Illusion I mentioned. A couple stuff on Psychic Scream, but other than that, we've covered that stuff. And then we had a couple things that were also adjusted utility-wise. So Void Tendrils, instead of being its own ability, now roots enemies when Psychic Scream fades off. So they can, again, reducing the amount of buttons that we have on our kit. And then Sheer Terror was, was actually nerfed, strangely enough. I don't know why they did that. We never really took that anyway. And then Psychic Scream's cooldown was adjusted baseline, so they're also compensating Psychic Voice with that as well. So not as strong of a talent. Baseline is just better. And then Light's Inspiration is a 1-point talent. So overall, that's our class tree. Honestly, I think I'm okay with this. I think the biggest weirdness for me is the Shadow or Death stuff. Right now, we do still have a few talents that do Shadow or Death inside the class tree, But then we weirdly have Death Speaker and Death and Madness in the Spec Tree. And this is just really strange to me because there is no longer, you can just take all the Shadow or Death talents to really make Shadow or Death a big part of our kit. Not only is Shadow or Death super, super weak baseline right now, but we've kind of split our talent choices, and you can't have Death Speaker and Death and Madness anymore. Death Speaker and Death and Madness are also in the bottom section of our tree, which is the most important talents. So that's my biggest disappointment with this. Obviously, the kind of small, like, here's 4% stamina or 2% intellect, whatever, those are kind of blah, but a lot of talent trees have that, so I'm not surprised we got them. I will note a bug, hopefully Blizzard is listening. They added the intellect talent and the stamina talent incorrectly. It's actually only buffing our base stat. This is a bug, it needs to get fixed. It just means that these are less valuable talents than they should be. Looking at the tooltip, this is an old bug. A lot of people that got these talents in the alpha got the same problem. Unfortunately, still not fixed coming into beta, so hopefully they have time to fix that. Okay, let's move on to the Spec Tree. All right, Spec Tree. This is where a lot of stuff to talk about, so we'll see if we can get through it all in a timely fashion. So, Dark Ascension has been removed, so now you just have Void Eruption as our main cooldown. They've also renamed it and just called it Void Form, just to be clear. So now in our Spec Tree, Void Form is the only option, no more choice node. They did kind of simplify this, and this is kind of disappointing. They did make a node after that to buff it a little bit, so there is that. But Void Form by itself is a really lame cooldown right now. It only buffs our spell damage by 10% baseline, and it still replaces Shadow Form, which means you go from a 10% increase to Shadow Form to a 10% increase with Void Form. So it's a zero op change. Now, you still get the mastery benefit, so there is a damage boost there for making up anytime you don't have Devouring Plague on something. More of an AoE thing than single target, especially for Season 1. So again, kind of disappointing. It then does give you access to Void Volley. So Void Bolt has been effectively removed. And instead, Void Volley now replaces Void Form while it's active. It's a 15-second cooldown that's hasted baseline. It still summons an Idol of Cthulhu when you press it, which is cool. In that regard, it actually is quite a valuable button to press. It's very, very strong. Still generates insanity every time you press it. But it's not Void Bolt, right? It's not refreshing dots. We don't have that mechanic in our kit anymore. So that part's pretty disappointing. I will say, like, overall, this actually makes it flow very nice for Void Weaver. Void Bolt was kind of overwhelming for Void Weaver and all the other stuff it had going on. But it does mean Archon is really losing out right now in terms of, like, feeling it has a good gameplay loop because of this change. So hopefully we have some time. Void Form definitely needs some love. Like I said, they did make... There are two talents that extend off of Void Form. You can choose between Improved Void Form, which means it generates 60 insanity and increases your spell damage by an additional 5%. It says additional 5, but again, that just means it's a 5% cooldown. Or Ancient Madness, which is the extension mechanic. Right now, the extension mechanic is far and beyond always going to be better for us. It's not even close. Improved Void Form just isn't doing enough, and it's too short of a cooldown to really make a difference. And a lot of that's because, again, Void Volley is a strong button to press. We like pressing Void Volley. Yeah, Void Form needs some love. It needs some damage baked in baseline. The Void Bolt loss is really tragic for Archon. They did make a recent talent into Archon, which we'll get more in depth in a bit, but for Archon, Void Volley cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds, so you do get a bit more of these more often, although 15-second base to 11-second base is really weird because it's not a fraction of the GCD, like 11 seconds doesn't fit into our GCD timer, so they just need to take another second off of this. Like, it needs to be divisible by the GCD, or otherwise you're going to get weird feeling windows if you're always casting. So you can tell they're trying to adjust this, but they need to go further on this. Void Form is a shell of what it used to be, unfortunately. We said Void Bolt's been removed. And then Devouring Plague. Devouring Plague has been renamed to Shadow Word Madness. I think mostly this was done because there's the new Devourer spec, so having our spender be Devourer, I don't know. I'm guessing that's why they did it. Unfortunately, with this change, they also removed the self-healing that Shadow Word Madness is doing. This was somewhat expected just because they're really culling defensives in this expansion. Honestly, we made out kind of like a bandit. Most of our defenses remained intact, except for this. This was the big thing that we lost, was the healing from Devouring Plague is now gone. Unfortunately, we still have this Mental Fortitude talent, which even says healing from Vamp Touch and Shadow Word Madness gives you that shield, But again, Shadow Word Madness doesn't give us any healing, so this talent is severely nerfed. Unfortunately, we're still always going to take it because we want to path into Shadowy Apparition. So it's kind of in a weird spot right now. There's a lot of things they could do to fix this, including buffing the healing from Vamp Touch or just the damage from Vamp Touch. It's really weak right now. Or, reworking this talent. I don't know, something. It's really disappointing now. And, yeah, we're squishier than we ever have been. So, yeah, hopefully we have time to fix that. Next change to talk about is Shadow Crash. Shadow Crash is now gone. It's been reworked into Tentacle Slam. This ability is freaking awesome. It looks sick. It's just really fun. For all intents and purposes, it's doing the same thing Shadow Crash does with a couple caveats. One, it has to be targeted. So there's no more reticle that we can pre-place this. Honestly, when playing around with this in alpha and now in beta, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I know a lot of people were upset about this. The main reason for that is it's a lot faster. So Shadow Crash took 1.5 seconds to actually reach your target when it actually landed and dotted things. Tentacle Slam is 1 second faster. Sometimes it's a little depending on the lag of the game. It's really quick. So having that pre-place function isn't as needed because it's a lot snappier and it feels a lot better just based off that. In addition to that, not only does it dot all the targets around the target that you're looking at, but it also can dot ones on the way and in between you and your target. This is a lot nicer positioning wise. It gives you a little bit more agency of like where you're placing, where you're casting this. Unfortunately, the dots is still capped at 6 targets. I can't sugarcoat this. It's a problem. Something needs to be fixed with this right now. We don't have a way to actually refresh our dots and extend them right now. This only being 6 targets just exacerbates that problem. So they didn't make it, nicer to use, but it's still target capped in terms of how many dots you're doing. Now, from an open world questing perspective or delves or like one pull at a time dungeons, this is fine. But for any mass AoE situations, this is going to be a problem. So we need to see something fixed on this. The last big change to talk about, mostly related to Archon, is Mind Flay and Sanity procs. So these procs are now exclusive to Archon and only come when halos are generated. So we still have this Surge of Insanity node in our Spec Tree, but it now just does damage and insanity generation of Mind Flay. It's no longer giving us procs. So that gameplay loop of Mind Flay Insanities is no longer in the base kit. Archon gets a little bit of that just with Manifested Power, where, again, creating a halo upgrades your next Flay to Mind Flay Insanity. But again, you're getting a lot less of these. So Archon, again, it needs help right now. The spec was basically based around Mind Flay Insanity, and now we barely cast it. And Void Form is a shell of what it once was. They also nerfed Perfected Form into the ground. So yeah, Archon needs help. It's screaming for it needs an identity here. All right, those are the highlights. Just kind of go through other stuff that was removed. Psychic Horror is gone. Void Torrent was changed to now be baseline just for Void Weaver. So it's not in the Spec Tree. You get that exclusively if you're Void Weaver now. Like I said, Void Bolt is gone. In terms of functionality, they added something in name that says Void Bolt, but it doesn't do anything that Void Bolt used to do. And then, of course, Silence Dispersion and Last Word were now all made baseline. New talents that were added, like I said, improved Void Form, which is kind of like the Dark Ascension mode. Unfortunately, I think one thing that's really missing, it doesn't make Void Form instant cast, which would make PvPers really happy about this. And the increase in damage is just still kind of laughable, to be honest. Shadow Fiend is now in the Spec Tree. Like I said, Death and Madness is a choice now with Death Speaker now. We did also, like I said before, we saw that 3 talents were data mined but never got actually added. I'm going to briefly mention these. We don't know if these are actually going to be in the game or not. Who knows? The first one is Shadow Power. Just increases your non-periodic spell damage by 6%. Mind Melt, which is Mind Flay, has a 20% increased crit strike chance and 50% increased crit strike damage. And the last one, super exciting, Corrupted Apparitions. Casting Shadow Word Madness, while at least 3 Vamp Touches are active, summons an apparition twisted with corruption. When it reaches the target, it explodes for AoE damage. This thing is awesome. I want this talent in the game. I don't know where they would put it or how it'll work, but man, this would be sick. Like I said, these 3 are not actually in the talent tree yet, so we don't know. They could all just be work in progress that we found, but this last one gets me excited, so we'll see. Again, lots of stuff was adjusted and reworked here. I think I covered the highlights here. The big one that I do want to mention, two things to call out. Shadowy Insight got a big reversion of a change. It now once again grants you a temporary charge of Mind Blast when it procs. So what this means is, in simple terms, if you're capped on Mind Blast charges at 2 charges, and you get a Shadowy Insight proc, now you have 3 charges. It's not, you don't waste that anymore. It's not just resetting the cooldown. It's giving you a free charge. This is awesome for Void Weaver. It really, it packs a really big punch for that. And because this proc rate scales with how often Shadow Word Pain is ticking, because it's an accumulator proc, things like Screams of the Void, and there is a new Void Weaver talent called Quicken Pulse that makes Shadow Word Pain and Rift deal damage more often. That's actually giving you more Shadowy Insight procs, and you can also talent into Dark Thoughts. So anyways, losing Void Weaver's set bonus from More Within going into Midnight, I honestly barely felt it, because I felt like Shadowy Insight was proccing all the time. It's really, really fun. I really like Void Weaver right now on the Midnight Beta when it's not crashing the game. And I think it's a notable improvement over what we have on live from a Void Weaver perspective. We covered Children of Insanity. Shadowy Apparitions, big change here. They doubled the damage, but they're now no longer triggered by Mind Blast. So this was, I think, done consciously, because we're spawning a lot of them with how often we're casting Shadow Word Madness, and with the new Apex talents, which we'll cover in just a second, but just know that was adjusted. Phantasmal Pathogen is now Spectral Horrors. Maddening Touch and that are now 1-point talents, and they also made Insidious Ire now affect Mind Flay. Okay, so feel free to read this if I missed anything, but those are the highlights. Oh, I forgot. People are going to be mad if I don't call this out. This is crazy. I don't know why they did this. Misery now replaces Shadow Word Pain. Okay, so we have to take Misery. You literally, if you don't take it, you can't play the game. You have to talent into Misery, and Misery replaces Shadow Word Pain. This doesn't make any sense to me. Yes, we rarely press Shadow Word Pain, but for tagging mobs, for PvP, all kinds of stuff, having this as an instant cast was useful. Them removing this was a mistake. They just straight up should revert this. There's no reason for this to happen. If people didn't want this on their bar, they could take it off. It doesn't hurt anyone. They need to put this back. Shadow Word Pain is literally our spec icon. They need to put it back in the game. This shouldn't be there. So, yeah, hopefully we see changes. All right, let's cover the Apex talents. So, if you're not aware, every spec in the game is getting new Apex talents, which are basically just an independent row of talents that chain off of each other that are in the bottom row of our tree. So you have to kind of, go all the way down before you can put points in. You have to unlock that last section once I eventually click enough stuff. Okay, so now these talents are tuned, I think, to where we're really going to want these all the time. So it's going to be kind of a core gameplay thing. Maybe in a future tier that's not true, but with the way tuning is worked out right now, we are going to be super Shadowy Apparition damage focused in Season 1, which I think is really awesome. And Void Apparitions is our Apex talent. So what this is, we'll kind of go over. The first one that you put in is when an effect from an idol is activated, you conjure Shadowy Apparitions. So like I mentioned before, since Mind Blast no longer generates Shadowy Apparitions, I think they did that to compensate for this, because every time you proc Yashiraj, proc any component of N'Zoth, get a Yogg-Saron spawn or a Cthulhu spawn, even the one from Void Volley or whatever else that is, you trigger Shadowy Apparitions. So this happens quite a lot. We're doing a lot of idol-based stuff, and you'll see that in a bit. The middle point is also called Void Apparitions. They're all called that. It makes Shadowy Apparitions have a 15-30% chance to spawn as a Void Apparition that cast a Void Bolt at the target and deal increased damage. Like I said, this is Void Bolt only in name. It doesn't refresh dots right now. I don't know if that's a bug or not. Haven't had any communication on this. The actual the apparition themselves do have tentacles that spawn on them, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, we just have a chance to get a beefier apparition. The last talent is Tentacle Slam has a 100% chance to activate an effect from one of our idols. So you can kind of see how these is all kind of, coming full circle here. Tentacle Slam, which is what replaced Shadow Crash, becomes a big rotational ability that we want to make sure we're not capping on cooldown charges, because it's going to spawn an effect from one of our idols, which then generates an apparition, has a chance to be a Void Apparition. It's just a really cool cycle. It's really, really fun. I like it a lot. Now, we did a little bit of testing. I need to keep doing more of this. It doesn't look like So first off, you can proc an idol that you aren't talented into. So if you aren't talented into any of the idols, doesn't matter. You still proc all of them, doesn't affect their proc chance. Now, they do have a bit of a curve here, so not all idols are weighted equally. It seems like you get a majority of the time you're going to get Cthulhu or N'Zoth to proc. Then Yashiraj and Yogg is the most rare thing to proc, which I think makes sense based on how you get them anyways. We'll see if that actually changes or if that holds true. We don't have a whole lot of data here. It's just I spent like an hour on a training dummy just pressing Tentacle Slam just to see how that works. So for now, that's how it is. But anyways, I think our Apex talents are awesome. It's really, really fun. I know a lot of people are hesitant about Tentacle Slam being a rotational ability, but honestly, I think it's fine. It plays fine to me. They just need to bump up how many targets it dots, to be honest. Okay, those are our Apex talents. So let's move on to the hero talent trees. Okay, so hero talents, let's cover Archon first. Like I mentioned, Surge of Insanity is gone. Void Form is nerfed. Archon needs a lot of help. We'll go over the changes, but man, this guy needs something. So Halo is now default for Archon, right? Like, so you get Void Torrent, Void Weaver, you get Halo as Archon. That's our kind of starting node here. And then they did remove Concentrated Infusion, which buffs Power Infusion. And then, as you can see, we got a new row of talents here. And again, once you're level 90, you're going to get access to all of these. Obviously, the choice nodes are choice nodes still, but you get to put points in all of these. So we'll go over them a little bit. So the first one, Spirit Well, increases the damage of shadowy apparitions. This is a great lock talent. Energy Conservation, Power Surge lasts an additional 5 seconds. This is actually the tier set from Season 3 of The War Within. Just very simplified. It gives you 1 extra Halo per cast of Halo, basically. We also have Realized Potential, Shadow or Death damage increased by 25%, and CD reduction. I don't know why they did this. Archon has nothing to do with Shadow or Death, so this is a really weird talent, but okay, that's what we got. Focus Outburst, like I mentioned earlier, Void Volley damage is increased, and the cooldown's reduced by 4 seconds. Like I mentioned, they really need to make this a GCD divisible cooldown, otherwise it's going to feel horrible. But I like where they're going with this. They could probably honestly make it more reduction and make Void Volley feel like a core part of Archon. I think that'd be a good change. And then Perfected Form was nerfed into the ground, basically. Instead of buffing Void Form by 20%, it's only 5%. So our cooldown is very weak right now. Our damage pattern is very flat. Hopefully we see some updates on that, because that's all we've gotten for Archon, unfortunately. All right, moving on to Void Weaver. Like I said, generally speaking, I think this is a net positive, and I think it's more fun to play in Midnight right now than it is on live. The changes to Void Form, although it's controversial for Archon, fits better for this. Obviously, the damage is still weak, but, not being flooded with Void Bolts and Void Blast just flows better for me. Like I mentioned, Void Torrent is now given to Void Weaver by default, and then it spawns the Rift, so this just becomes our first talent as a Void Weaver. And then, I already mentioned the Shadowy Insight interaction. We'll go over some of the new talents as well. Okay, the first one, Overwhelming Shadows, just says Void Torrent deals more damage. Okay. Quick Impulse, we mentioned that before. Shadowed Pain and Rift deal ticking damage 25% more often, which is great. Again, that feeds into Shadowy Insight procs, which is cool. And then we have Touch of the Void, which says Void Heart, which is the kind of damage bonus while Rift is active, persists for 8 seconds after the Rift ends. Not the biggest damage increase, but it is something. Again, this is kind of contributing to how our damage is still kind of flat. Then they adjusted Void Empowerment. It now grants a charge of Shadowy Insight instead of Mind Devourer. Honestly, I've played with this a lot. I'm not a big fan of this. It just feels too overwhelming right now. On paper, you can kind of see where their heads are with this, but playstyle-wise, wasn't a big fan of this. And then they did move Void Heart around, so the positioning of stuff was a little adjusted here. So, and last thing to cover, our tier set in Season 1 of Midnight. So our two-piece just says Shadow of Madness damage increased by 10% and Insanity cost reduced by 5%. So with this, even though Void Form's kind of weird, we're getting really long Void Forms, even in Season 1 with like crappy gear. So kind of unhealthy, but really, really strong. And you're getting more Shadowy Apparitions because of this. The 4 set just says, hey, Apparitions and Void Apparitions damage increased by 40%. So Season 1, we are all about those apparitions. So this is what we're revolving around, which makes sense because of all the Apex talents and stuff like that. And that's going to be Shadow in Season 1, is just slamming apparition stuff. And that's what we're doing. That's how things are looking. So, okay. I know I chatted for a lot, and that was just a lot of me going over this post, but hopefully that gives you some insight into how Shadow is right now, a couple of the problems we need to see adjusted going into beta. I'll try to do update videos as we see new changes, but just wanted to give you a big round of updates for the beta. Big thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon, YouTube members. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.